Hey, my name is Wes. Welcome back to another lesson. In today's lesson, we will go over the verb tener. So today's lesson is a yellow lesson in which we will go over the different verbs in Spanish. So today we will go over the verb tener, which means to have. Now, I know that learning verbs and verb conjugation is not one of the most exciting things to do when you are starting out and learning a new language. However, verbs are super important in your language learning journey because they are the backbone of any sentences that you will form. So for this lesson, please make sure that you're in the right headspace and that you can focus on these conjugations. Alright, without further ado, let's get into today's lesson, el verbo tener, to have. Alright, so as always, in your notebook, again, you can draw this table. And you can pause the video right here, take a copy of this table, and then press play once you're ready. Alright, so now that we are ready, let's get into the first conjugation, which is I have. And in Spanish we say
Yo tengo. Yo tengo.
I have. So now we can add this as the first word to our list. Yo tengo. I have. And as we did in a previous lesson also, let's also look at an example sentence. So, I have a car is yo un coche. So of course it's yo tengo un coche.
Yo tengo un coche.
And the reason why I included un coche in this lesson is because in the previous lesson we learned about the indefinite articles. So un coche, a car. Yo tengo un coche. I have a car. Alright, let's move on to you have, which in Spanish is
Tú tienes.
you have. So again, we can add this to our list, pause the video if I'm going too fast, and then simply hit play again once you're ready. And for this practice sentence, let's make a question. So, do you have the photo?
Tú, la foto.
And of course, do you have the photo becomes
Tú tienes la foto. Tú tienes la foto.
and la foto ends with an O. So you might expect that foto is el foto. But actually the word foto comes from fotografía, which is the full version of the word photo. So fotografía ends with an A. And so this is a feminine noun. And so this is a bit of a tricky noun because it's actually feminine, even though it appears to be masculine. And this is not something that happens very often in Spanish, but it does happen. So I wanted to include it for you in this example as well. All right. Do you have the photo?
Tú tienes la foto.
Alright, so then the next conjugation, which is he, she, has, or you formal have.
Él, ella, usted, tiene.
However, this time again we leave the S at the end. So not tienes, but tiene.
Él tiene. Ella tiene. Usted tiene.
So in Spanish, if you want to say he is hungry, which in Spanish we don't really translate exactly like we do in English. We don't say he is hungry, but we say he has hunger, is
Él, hambre.
and again, soft H.
Él tiene hambre. Él tiene hambre.
Which literally means he has hunger. But in English we would translate this to he is hungry. Or
Ella tiene hambre. Ella tiene hambre.
and hambre is hunger. Hambre with a soft H. Or
Usted tiene hambre. Usted tiene hambre.
you have hunger or you are hungry. Alright, then the next conjugation, which is we have, which is
Nosotros, nosotras, tenemos.
and for this one it's especially important to understand where the accent lays. So it's not tenemos, but it's tenemos.
Nosotros tenemos. Nosotras tenemos.
So we have the books is
Nosotros, los libros. Nosotros, los libros.
and this becomes
Nosotros tenemos los libros. Nosotros tenemos los libros.
we have the books. Or if you're talking about an all feminine group, then we can say
Nosotras tenemos los libros. Nosotras tenemos los libros.
we have the books. Alright, the next conjugation is you have.
Vosotros, vosotras tenéis. Vosotros tenéis. Vosotras tenéis.
And then for the example sentence, we have another question, which is, do you have some ideas?
Vosotros, unas ideas.
So again, I included unas ideas because in the previous lesson we went over the indefinite articles. So una idea is a idea and unas ideas is some ideas or a few ideas, or even in this sentence it could also mean any ideas. Do you have some ideas? Do you have any ideas? Do you have a few ideas? It really depends on the context of whatever it is you're speaking about.
¿Vosotros unas ideas? ¿Vosotros tenéis unas ideas?
Or, of course, when we are referring to a group of all girls or women, we say,
¿Vosotras tenéis unas ideas? ¿Vosotras tenéis unas ideas?
do you have some ideas? And as we talked about before, vosotros and vosotras is mostly used in Spain only. So if you want to say you in another country that's outside of Spain, then we use ustedes. Alright, then the first to last, you have.
Ustedes tienen. Ustedes tienen. Ustedes una pregunta. Ustedes una pregunta.
Una pregunta is a question. So some questions would be unas preguntas. Alright, ustedes tienen una pregunta.
Ustedes tienen una pregunta.
And ustedes can mean you informal in a country outside of Spain, or you formal when it's multiple people in Spain. So ustedes tienen una pregunta, you have a question. Alright, and then the last conjugation we will learn, which is ellos or ellas tienen. So it's the same as ustedes tienen, ellos or ellas tienen. They have.
Ellos tienen. Ellas tienen.
So for this last example, let's use the word surprise, which is sorpresa in Spanish. So two surprises, dos sorpresas. They have two surprises.
Ellos dos sorpresas.
And sorpresa can also mean gift or present, so it doesn't only mean surprise. So when you say dos sorpresas, it can mean two gifts, two surprises, or two presents. Alright, and this sentence obviously becomes
Ellos tienen dos sorpresas.
they have two surprises. Or if we're talking about a group of girls or women, we say ellas tienen dos sorpresas.
Ellas tienen dos sorpresas.
They have two surprises. Alright, so those are all the different conjugations for the verb tener, which is to have. And here we see that the verb tener is actually quite an irregular verb, because the stem, so the beginning part, the black part you see, actually changes depending on the subject pronoun that we were talking about. So when we talk about yo, we see ten, but then when it becomes tú, we add the I. So instead of ten, it becomes tien. And so because this beginning part changes, and we like to call this beginning part the stem of a verb, so the first part of the verb before it conjugates, because this changes, we like to call this verb irregular. Alright, and then as always, let's look at some practice sentences also. So now it's up to you to put into action everything that we've learned in this lesson. So pause the video right here if you want to practice, and then in a couple of seconds I will show you the answers. Alright, and here are the answers. Alright, and that's already it for this 14th lesson, this yellow verb lesson in which we went over the verb tener, which is to have in Spanish. Again, as always, if you have any questions, please let me know. And for the reference sheet, you can go to my website, SpanishWithWes.com, where you can find all of the information that you need. That's it for this lesson. I hope to see you in lesson number 15, in which we'll go over, let's see, a green lesson, some of the fundamentals. Alright, I'm excited to see you in the next lesson. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope that this was helpful, and I hope to see you in the next lesson. Alright, adios.